Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wisconsin Water Week. You are in the Wednesday afternoon session of Shoreland Zoning, a tool to protect your waterfront investment and your lake's fishery. So hopefully you're all in the right session. We'd like to thank the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership for bringing all these educational virtual seminars to you this week. And we're looking forward to hearing this afternoon from Lynn Markham, a shoreland specialist with Wisconsin Extension, as well as Kay Lutze, a Wisconsin DNR shoreland zoning policy coordinator, and also Northeast Region Waterway Supervisor. And they'll be, of course, speaking on the topic of shoreland zoning. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put those questions into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So if you hover your cursor over the screen, a little menu bar should appear at the bottom, and you should see a feature called chat, and you can type your question into the chat, and we'll be monitoring those questions, and Lynn and Kay will attempt to address the questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll leave a few minutes at the end, and as time allows, we will try to get to as many questions as we can. I am going to be turning off my audio and video and then handing the floor over to Lynn, who's going to be kicking us off. And we look forward to hearing from Lynn and Kay. So I'm going to do that now and take it away, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We wanted to do something a little bit different related to shoreline zoning. We've talked a lot in the last few years about what the standards are and potential impacts from that. Now that we've had changes to shoreline zoning for a few years, Kay and I decided to put together a number of photos showing what type of building we're seeing since those new standards went into place. So that's going to be the key of our presentation today. Here's our outline. So we'll start out with a couple of polls. What components of shoreline zoning do you value? We'll talk a little bit about fisheries, like we included in the title. What do fish need and what does that mean related to shoreline standards? Then we'll go on our photo tour, looking at how shoreline zoning has been working around Wisconsin in the last couple of years. In that, we'll be reviewing what some of the standards are, but also looking at what does that look like on the landscape and what do we think of what it looks like. And then at the end, we'll be asking the question, do you think any of the land use standards, meaning shoreline zoning, regular zoning, subdivision ordinances, should they be changed to better protect lakes, waterfront property investments, and fisheries? So we'll get started on the first poll. Didn't ask you, Chad, if I'm launching the polling, but I'll assume I am. Okay, so here's our first poll. Which of the following do you value? Please check all that apply. Maintaining your waterfront property investment, maintaining the local tax base, a healthy fishery, good water quality and clarity, good for swimming and other recreation, and wildlife habitat and wildlife viewing. I see people are weighing in. Perfect. This is interesting. Okay, I'll give you like 5 more seconds to click whatever you want to click, and then I'll show you the results. All right, it looks like most people got in. Okay, so here are our results. The top ones are good water quality. 100% of people who voted said that's one of the things they value. And it looks like the next couple are a healthy fishery and wildlife habitat and wildlife viewing. All of them, you know, got some votes, definitely, but that's what we got from the first one. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so next, I want to talk a little bit about what Wisconsin statutes say, what the Wisconsin legislature adopted with shoreline zoning. So these come straight from statutes, some of the purposes for shoreline zoning, and many of you have seen these before. prevent and control water pollution. So there's that water quality one that ranked right at the top. Protect spawning grounds, fish, and aquatic life. That was also a high rank. Reserve shore cover and natural beauty, like we see down here at the bottom right. One we often don't mention, but is included in statute and seems particularly relevant today, this year, last year, is controlling building sites, placement of structure, and land uses. If you were in some of the sessions on Monday, and maybe just from your own backyard, your own area, maybe your own lake, you know, we've had high water levels in many of our inland lakes for the last couple of years because of a lot of precipitation, much above average, sometimes 10 inches more than we usually get. So my second poll is actually, should shoreland zoning, that's what I mean by SLZ, ensure that waterfront homes are located in a safe place on stable ground. And by that, I mean both that you don't have an eroding bank so that your structure ends up very close to the shore, too close to the shore, as well as that you're not dealing with flooding issues, that the structure, the home isn't placed too low on the landscape that it's flooding. Okay, so I see we've got a bunch of people weighing in on this. We've got a little bit of a split. Most people say yes. A few people say no. Maybe we can discuss that a little bit more in the end. I'll share the results now. This is what we see in terms of whether shoreline zoning should ensure this. Okay. All right. So just a quick review what the shoreline zoning standards are. I promise this is my only slide about this with the diagram. So shoreline zoning standards include 7 main categories. The first one is lot size. Unsewered lots have to be 100 feet wide and 20,000 square feet. That's about a half of an acre. Sewered lots can be smaller. A 75-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark. In some cases, this can be less. If there are structures on both sides, then people are allowed to build closer to the water. A buffer that's 35 feet deep. This area minus the viewing and access corridor is typically left alone. The trees and shrubs are left in place. An impervious surface limit. So these are our hard surfaces like rooftops and driveways. Not more than 15% of the lot in some cases, although we'll talk later about how in some cases you can have significantly more than 15%. A height standard of 35 feet within 75 feet of the ordinary high water mark. And these structures that are built very close to the water at this point can be completely rebuilt, torn down and rebuilt. And some of them can also be vertically expanded up to 35 feet. And then the last piece is limiting soil disturbance. Okay, so from 1970 to 2015, counties could voluntarily adopt higher shoreline standards, and 54 of our 71 counties with shoreline zoning did that. In 2015, the Wisconsin legislature changed the law, so counties may not have standards that are more restrictive or protective than these state minimum standards. Okay, so here's our third poll, and let me load it up for you. Okay, which shoreline zoning standards do you think protect your waterfront investment? Please choose all that apply. Minimum lot size, setbacks, buffers, impervious surface standards, limiting structures close to the water, and limiting soil disturbance. This is interesting. What I'm seeing, and I'll let you keep voting for a little while, but is most people are choosing all of them. The numbers just kept going up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, about 5 more seconds, and then I'll close this one. We'll see what we see. Okay, so these are our poll results. Everyone who voted agrees that shoreline setbacks help protect the waterfront investments. And that very much goes with what we're going to be talking about with high water levels and the like. And really all of them have over 80% agreement. Some of the other highest ones are shoreland buffers and limiting structures close to the water and limiting soil disturbance. Sorry, now I'm sharing those so you can see. So that's kind of where we're at for those. So this is good. It looks like most people recognize that these really all contribute to protecting your waterfront investment. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what fish need. If we're going to have a healthy fishery, well, what do fish need? This is from a book that I worked on a few years ago named Fish Hotel, this illustration. And I saw Greg Breeze's in there, and Greg was the one who helped me originally get started on doing kids books. He said, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, kids books about shorelands and protecting lakes. So when we look at this photo of the two kids snorkeling, looking for fish, where are they going to find fish? Well, here we have the sandy area and the pier, and here we have the fallen trees and the aquatic plants. One question that I often ask kids when we talk about this is, how big is a fish when it hatches? You know, let's say it's a walleye or it's a pike or it's a muskie. It's going to end up being a big fish. How big is it when it first hatches? The answer is it's about the size of a green pea. So it's pretty tiny. And if it wants to survive until tomorrow, it needs a place to hide. And there aren't many places to hide over here. It's where the plants are and where the fallen trees are that there are lots of places to hide. You know, this is the underwater part that some of us don't see. I didn't see a lot of until the last couple of years when I took up snorkeling. Okay, so looking at that, and then here's the scientific approach to the same thing. This was put together by some folks out of Minnesota. What do fish need for habitat and what tends to impact that? So fish need physical structure, like those aquatic plants, like the woody habitat, that's the fallen trees, and like a good substrate, that's the lake bottom, that it's not all silted in, that you have rocks sticking out and you have little gaps between the sand particles. And it's really the shoreline disturbance from shoreline development that impacts this. You know, people take trees out of the water, people take plants out of the water. And it's silting in, you know, if you've got erosion along the shoreline, that's what's going to impact the substrate. The water quality side of things, which fish also require specific properties in water quality. Our predators need water clarity so they can find their lunch, so they can see through multiple feet of water. Sedimentation is part of water quality, turbidity. Phytoplankton and periphyton, that's that they have something to eat. The aquatic insects have something to eat, so fish have something to eat. And then hypolimnetic oxygen, the oxygen in the lower levels of the lake. Fish need oxygen just like we need oxygen. And when it's depleted, they can't live there. So it's watershed disturbance throughout the watershed, urbanization. And by urbanization, it doesn't have to be cities, but urban types of development, rooftops, driveways, roads, parking areas. Urbanization as well as agriculture all contribute to the water quality and whether fish have what they need in that way. Fish are indicators. Healthy lakes and rivers have many fish species, and I do have to put the caveat on there. I'm not talking cold water streams. I know that's another story. And less healthy lakes and rivers have few or no fish species. So what we're seeing for fish in our lake or in our stream is really an indicator of the health of that lake or stream, just like aquatic insects and vertebrates and some of the testing that we do along those lines. Looking at different types of development and how they impact specifically that water quality. Here we've got 1940s development with a small home quite a ways back from the water and a short driveway, 7% impervious. Here we've got the much larger home, around 3,000 square feet, a paved longer driveway, wider driveway, extra parking spaces, most of the trees taken out, And what we see here is we end up in that 1990s development, which you could also call 2020 development, with less water when it's raining is going to evaporate off the trees and shrubs. If you've removed some of the trees and shrubs, you end up with more water hitting the ground. And in fact, about 5 to 7 times as much runoff making it into the lake, both due to lack of trees and shrubs, as well as due to compaction of this area that's maintained as lawn. More runoff carries more phosphorus, 5 to 7 times more phosphorus, as well as about 4 times more sediment. I don't think I have a slide separately later, so I'll just mention that when you have more sediment going to the lake, that directly impacts some fish species, including walleye, because it smothers their eggs. It lands on top of their eggs, and walleye don't come back and take care of their eggs. Okay, so here's our summary. I'll just go through it briefly. If we have less than 8% of the watershed, the area that drains to a lake or stream, impervious, we have lots of fish species and lots of fish overall. 8 to 12%, we lose this group of fish. Greater than 12%, we lose the top group of fish and the middle group of fish, and we're left with these fish down here. These are some pretty special fish that can deal with warm water and muddy water. The brook stickleback, listed here at the very bottom, survives because it can come to the top and breathe air when the water gets bad enough. We had a study done of 164 Wisconsin lakes that found this same trend: more impervious surface, fewer fish. So you might think that you would set an impervious surface standard somewhere in here, but in fact, our impervious surface standard, our most restrictive standard, is set at 15% right now. Not sufficient to protect fish. Just to show you what this looks like on the landscape, this is taken from Door County. They have a web, let me see, a web map that calculates impervious surface. It's quite handy. These lot sizes are about 1 acre in size, and these structures and driveways, you can see some of them have a U driveway, some have fairly circuitous driveways and parking areas. We've got 30%, 26% impervious, and 22% impervious. And these are on lots that are about twice the minimum lot size required of 20,000 square feet. Okay, so given that, which of these standards affect fish survival? And I didn't turn this into a poll, so I'll just tick them off. The impervious surface limit clearly affects fish survival, and I would argue that the lot size largely determines impervious surface limit. Everybody wants a house and a driveway, so how large of a lot do you have to place that on? I would also argue that the buffer and the setback, giving that runoff time to soak into the ground before it makes it to the lake and stream, those both contribute to fish survival. Soil disturbance, we talked about sedimentation, how that can smother eggs. And I would also argue that rebuilding and vertically expanding buildings near the shore impacts fish survival. And Kay has some photos of that later on. You'll see some erosion, some land disturbance that's happened there. And that's why I argue that quite close to the lake. I wouldn't say the height has a lot to do with fish survival, but 6 out of 7 do. Okay. So now I'd like you to use the chat box, and I have a few things that I'm going to show you. So if you're a small fish, do you think you can survive along these shorelines? What do you think it's like from the fish perspective? What do you think on this one? If you could hop in the chat box and tell me what would make this easy or hard for a fish to survive right off that shoreline. Poor survival, hard. Okay, good. What would make it hard to survive there? Rocky bottom, pier structure, hard, not much food. Yes. There's probably a good weed bed from the fertilizer running off into the lake. No woody debris, no fallen trees, little cover. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you don't see much of anything for habitat, vegetation along here. It means if you're a small fish, you're kind of out in the open. It's true that fertilizer may lead to plant growth along here. When we fertilize the lawn, we don't just fertilize the lawn, we fertilize the lake too, because some of it runs in. So it depends on what people do here in terms of whether they pull the aquatic plants out or not. Fertilizer, grass to the shoreline. One of the other things that fertilizer use does is it's going to be more nutrients going to the lake, which feeds not just the aquatic plants, the macrophytes, but also feeds the algae. When you have algae growth, for some fish, that makes it hard for them to successfully hunt because the water gets cloudy, it gets green. Okay, how about this situation? These are approximately 75 foot wide lots, so they're a little bit bigger than what's required on our sewered lakes. What do you think about this in terms of how it's going to impact the fish? I would also ask you to think, besides nutrients, also think about the sedimentation. Everything drains directly to the lake, no buffer, runoff, zero buffer, not good, fertilizer and nutrients going in. Good point here also, shade. When we lose our buffer, when we think of the different layers, the forbs, the shrubs, the trees, that's going to shade it during part of the day. You can see, like back here, there was naturally probably trees down here too. And when you lose that shade, you're going to have warmer water. You also have warmer water just because the water is running down here as runoff rather than soaking into the ground. When it soaks into the ground, it's kind of like an underground refrigerator. It cools that water before it enters the lake underground. If it runs over the top, it doesn't cool it down. Yeah, thanks. How about this? Would it be easy to be a small fish here? Why not? Good cover, easy, lots of cover. Excellent buffer on land, excellent water plants, a northern hangout. Yeah, lots of vegetation, lots of cover, buffer and setback. Looks good for fish habitat. Yes, there'll probably be more coming in. I totally agree with the comments that you've provided. I think to the extent that we can get people thinking about what's it like to be a fish, it helps them think about what can we do on land to help our lakes. In addition to the cover side of things, obviously you've got a lot of cover with all these aquatic plants. It also helps in terms of, this is like a buffet for them. This is where all the aquatic insects live. This is major lunchtime buffet right here. So that's helpful too. Oh, an interesting one, protection from raptors as well, if you can be under these lily pads. Sure. Okay, great. And now I'm going to hand it off to Kay for the photo tour.
Okay, so we really wanted to do a photo tour to highlight some of the issues we've been seeing for the last couple of years. And starting off, while I know that most of you probably are living on inland lakes, you are very aware that we've had record high levels set on the Great Lakes in 2019 and 2020. And this really resulted in properties experiencing increased risks from not only erosion, but coastal flooding. We saw some of the wettest years on record, 2018 and 2019, which really contributed to our record high levels in 2020. So as Lynn mentioned, you know, from the legislative action we witnessed in 2015, non-conforming structures could be reconstructed in their footprints and vertically expanded to 35 feet in height. So how would you feel if you can just put it in the chat box, put some words in there to kind of explain what feeling you have. Like if you had reconstructed your home and vertically expanded it to potentially 35 feet in height, how would you feel today looking at that picture, seeing that it's being inundated? Yeah, not happy, nervous, investment loss, yikes. Yeah, and these are just kind of illustrations to show that while we've had a 75-foot setback, and as Lynn explained, we had numerous counties, 51 probably out of the 71, they had more restrictive or more protective setbacks, and a shoreland setback was one of them. So, you know, one of the things we are also talking about today, while shoreland zoning is a really good tool, it doesn't always protect your property or your structure with legislative changes and different allowances. So, I mean, this is really to start thinking about what happens when we experience physical changes on our landscape as well. So next picture, Lynn.
Yep.
So put in the chat box whether or not you live on a seepage lake, yes or no. All right, so we've got some yeses. We've actually got quite a few yeses. Okay. So as a supervisor in the Northeast region, I can tell you that I sit on a high water team and we are experiencing some incredible groundwater levels, again, at near historic highs throughout the state, which is really consistent with the groundwater flooding reports we're getting with the department. And so just like coastal areas, seepage lakes are experiencing flooding, and you are seeing that your erosion, your buildings, they're at risk due to that rise in that water table elevation. And we know that this can be perceived as a problem, but low water can be perceived as a problem, high water can be perceived as a problem, and it's natural for these lakes to go up and down in cycles, and they can probably remain sometimes for decades, but there is a significant economic and public health and environmental cost. Yeah, the well in the background is erratic, yeah. So what's interesting is we have the desire to make sure that we're trying to assist property owners with shoreline zoning standards. But what do, right? Like when you have a seepage lake that potentially is 10 or 15 feet higher than normal, what do? I mean, property owners need to consider probably a couple of different things to do, and one might be relocating the structure. Next picture, Lynn.
Actually, Kay, if I could jump in for just a second, I want to let people know that our next session, the panel, will include Aaron Pruitt, and his specialty is groundwater flooding around the state. And he's going to provide some data on how much water levels have gone up in different parts of the state.
Yeah, and that next session is an hour and a half long, and it really does give us an opportunity to probably hold more of these conversations that we want. So these are just kind of like snapshot thoughts. And I also thought a different picture would be up, but that's okay. We'll transition back. I know where it's coming up. So You know, one of the other things that water levels can impact, of course, are going to be our bluff lines and our shorelines. We are seeing that they're also collapsing. And if you look at the photo here, you can see that there was vegetation removal. Anybody see what's sticking out the side slope? Type in the chat box if you see that. What do you think that is? Yep, drain pipe. Yep. Next picture, Lynn, I think will also illustrate. Okay, just some more. This is coastal bluff erosion. We're seeing again some vegetation removal. Next picture, Lynn. And again, just erosion from high water and severe storm events. In that lower picture, that's actually the sanitary system and the sanitary tank sitting there. So complete collapse and bluff failure. Sanitary systems, yet typically today we do have conventional mounds, etc. And really you do not want them placed waterward of your structure if you're sitting on a bluff. So other things to be thinking about. And next picture, Lynn. And we're seeing more and more of this. I am getting a lot of county code administrators sending me pictures in the last couple of years of complete buffer removal. So this is concerning for all of the reasons that Lynn just presented on. And, you know, the silt fence is great, but it's probably not gonna stop the sedimentation and erosion that's going into the lake. So a concerning trend that we are seeing. And next photo. This is on a seepage lake, and they, you know, so I mean, you want to protect your property, and this home was flooded. There's water in the basement, and they built a berm around it. But looking at this right now, where do you think that sediment's going to end up? Just type in the chat box if you think that. Yeah. Yeah, so you know, it's a challenge. We've got a lot of unconsolidated fill actually in the water at this point because the water was up to the home. So I think, you know, one of the takeaways that the last couple of years have really, really illustrated, and I hear my mom in my head right now, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. So there's, you know, some really good things to be thinking about in terms of if you have a non-conforming structure, should you be reconstructing it in that same location? You know, where could you maybe be positioning that structure to protect that investment for the future for yourself, and as well as the lake and the resource and the fishery. So we wanted to just to share a snapshot of what's kind of happening around the state. And I'm sure that you've been seeing them yourself, living on the lakes. But Lynn, why don't we go to the next one?
Sure. And I'll go through this pretty quick. I see we want to leave a few minutes for questions too. So just a summary of what makes shorelines unstable. Some things that we can't change are steep slopes and soils. What we can do in those situations is to recognize that those slopes may be unstable and try to stay back and away from them. And now I think I'm just going to skip to the next slide. So what can you do to protect your waterfront investment? Build far back from the water. If you're going to build or expand or build some sort of accessory structure, as far back as possible is a good thing. Leaving the trees, shrubs, and other deep-rooted plants in place. If they're gone, replant them. That can stabilize your slope. Minimize those hard surfaces that create runoff, whether that's driveway area or buildings. If you can build up rather than out. And then like Kay was talking about, both with downspouts as well as septic systems, try to keep them away from these slopes. If you can send the water in the other direction so it's not destabilizing the slope, that's helpful. So I just wanted to point out what's currently allowed in terms of impervious surface, up to 15% without mitigation and up to 30% with mitigation. This is the same photo I showed from before, but just to keep in mind, it goes back to what Kay was saying, just because you're allowed to do it by shoreland zoning doesn't mean it's a good idea for your property investment, for the fishery, for the lake as a whole. This is also something that's essentially allowed under our current shoreland zoning standard. On highly developed shorelines, up to 40% on residential lots and 60% on business used lots when you do mitigation. These lots are around 50% impervious. Some of them are higher than that now. And again, this goes to lot size. These lots are, some of them are only 50 feet wide, some of them are 60. And when we create lots that narrow, that small, it's hard to keep it below 30%. So I think we need to think about how large the lots we create are in the first place. I see the question, why 60 for a resort? Because that's what the legislators voted on, is really what it comes down to. They allowed this up to 60% for business uses if they do mitigation. I just wanted to point out this new court case that came out a couple of months ago. The town of Newbold, Oneida County, their subdivision ordinance required a 225-foot minimum shoreline frontage on Lake Mildred. This went to court. It went all the way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they said that the subdivision authority, which comes from Chapter 236 of Wisconsin statutes, is not preempted by county shoreline zoning restrictions. In other words, this 225-foot minimum frontage stands because it's in the subdivision ordinance. That's legal, that applies. The county can still only have a 100-foot standard in their shoreland zoning ordinance, but the courts have clearly said that the subdivision ordinance for this town is valid.
Yeah, and that goes for a county subdivision ordinance as well, not just a town.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to cover this last side, and again, we've got a non-conforming structure, and the legislative changes, you can go ahead and reconstruct it within its footprint, expand up to 35 feet. This is about, I think, 6 or 7 feet from the ordinary high water mark. And that's exactly what the property owner did. And this is what the resulting photo is. And I don't know if we have one from the front.
We do.
But we do. Okay. So the one thing is also, if you're going to do this and take advantage of the allowance that was created, we just want you to be thinking about also protecting your investment from high water levels and ice shoves. Something that we don't always think about, because not everybody is here during the winter and not everybody experiences what happens during the winter. So we've got several areas. When I regulated in Door County, I had several cottages that were completely moved off of their foundation and actually ended up about 15 feet back. So again, just because you can do it doesn't always mean you should do it. So just food for thought a little bit on what we're seeing and some ideas to really protect not only your investment long term, but also the resource.
Okay. I think with that, I'd like to move to questions. I think this photo shows a couple of good examples about waterfront development that does protect the lake, the investment, and the fishery, having homes up from the water as well as back from the water, keeping the vegetation in place and having a reasonable setback. I see one question here for the end. The Wisconsin Conservation Congress spring hearing for this year has a question about restoring local control to counties on lakeshore zoning ordinances. Has there been a lot of talk about this?
My answer would be no. I haven't even been made aware that is on the spring hearing. So that's really great to see.
If you have other questions, please stick them in the chat. If we don't have other questions, we could hop to the last poll.
Let's do that.
Okay. So here we go, and I need to find my polls again. So poll 4. I changed the wording slightly from what's up there. Do you think any land use standards should be changed? And by land use standards, I mean shoreland zoning, I mean general zoning, I mean subdivision ordinances. Shoreland zoning right now is decided at the state level. The state minimum standards apply in every county. But subdivision ordinances can be used locally. And I think we may talk a little bit in the next session also about the potential for counties to adopt a standard that would require new homes, new buildings to be built a certain vertical distance above the ordinary high water mark so that they're less likely to be flooded. So you guys saw the options. I see that you're weighing in. I'll give you a little bit longer. Lots of voting happening here. Okay, I'll show you what I see here. Oh, a couple more. Okay, so here are the results we've got. So the top one is limiting structures close to the water. Okay, so that is a result of some changes that were made a few years ago that allowed non-conforming structures to be torn down and rebuilt in their same location, like that last example Kay just showed. It also, we didn't talk about it, but structures that are located by variance can also be rebuilt. So that's a change that was just made a few years ago. If you can change one way, you can change the other way. We just need political will to do so. And I'm glad to know Conservation Congress is taking that forward. Counties can be more protective. Looks like that came in number 2. Yes, right now, decisions are made at the state level, but certainly being more protective on all shoreline standards would make a big difference. I see shoreline buffers is also up there, and all of them got a fairly high rating. So that's great. I see Chad put this chat in. Just a reminder, the next session, a discussion panel on healthy shorelines, will continue in this same Zoom room, so you don't need to leave. We'll pick up right here at 1:30 for that panel discussion. All right. Well, I think that's good. Thank you everyone for coming. Oh, let me just show you one more thing. So here's contact information for Kay and I. And some of you have probably seen this publication, Protecting Your Waterfront Investment. It's been around for a number of years. It was originally written in 2005. I've been working recently on updating it, and part of that update includes a page on building far from the shore and high water levels. So if that's something you're interested in for your lake group or your neighbors, you could send me an email and get on a list, and I'll let you know when the new one is available, which should be within the next month or two.
And it's
Alrighty.
Paul Dearlove, your moderator, jumping in. It looks like we just ran out of time. So on behalf of all the attendees this afternoon, thank you so much for all the great information you shared. And as was mentioned earlier, we're going to be transitioning right into the next session of which you're going to be participating, Lynn and Kay, and that's a discussion panel on how to create healthy shorelands while facing challenges. So this is a good time for folks to either stay on the call here and join the discussion panel, or to refresh your memories on what's on the agenda. There are other sessions I know that are taking place at this time as well. So thank you again, Lynn and Kay. Again, fantastic presentation. We really appreciate it.